Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Odd Tandem. My name is Bobby Julich, and sitting across from me virtually is Jens Voigta. Jens, I hear that you are going to be headed over to the Tour de France and hanging off the back of a motorcycle here in a couple days. I mean, it's Thursday before the Tour. Are you getting excited?
I am, and yes, I will be for the first 9 days on a motorbike starting in Florence, beautiful Italy. 9 days on a motorbike for Eurosport commentating live from the race, which will be absolutely fantastic, but also nerve-wracking.
So, a lot of you, Christian Vandervelde, a couple of our other friends do the same thing for other networks. What is the pucker factor when you're on the back of that motorcycle? Is there a couple times where you're just kind of hanging on and hoping that everything works out, or is it pretty safe?
Mostly it's pretty safe, yes, absolutely. But yeah, well, I got a motorbike license, so I knew what I was getting into. But literally, your life is in the hands of the pilot. There's nothing, absolutely nothing you can do to influence that. So when you're on a motorbike, you got to be a little bit proactive. It's not like you get in a car and you put on a seatbelt and relax and fall to sleep. That doesn't work. You got to be watching ahead to make sure you see if the road turns to the left or to the right, or if there crash is happening and your pilot has to brake. The last thing he needs is you, 80 kilos of weight, bouncing into his back when he's trying to control the motorbike and his own weight. So you gotta be awake all day long. There's a few moments where you go, I wouldn't do this, but since the pilot is doing it, you go, well, I guess I gotta follow. And if he leans to the left, everything inside of you screams, I don't want to lean down. I don't want to lean to the left, but you have to, because that's for the balance of the bike. So you have to follow the pilot. But so far I had 4 or 5 different pilots. I like them all. So I have no problem. I have no trust issues. The guys are good. Even though at the start I always go, hey, listen, I'm happily married with children. I want to go home in one piece. I hope you too. And that's how we work.
Well, thank you for doing that for us. I mean, I know we don't have Eurosport over here, but it adds a really cool aspect to the sport. But talking about that, adding a cool aspect to the sport, we had such a cool guest today. He was world champion, Olympic champion on the track. He was a TT specialist, an innovator. One of our old teammates, Chris Boardman. How cool was that, Jens? He's speaking with old Chris.
I know, it was absolutely amazing. Brought back so many memories. He was my first roommate in first training camp, December 97. We had the first training camp, the first come together training camp, my first roommate, and it was absolutely fantastic. I was, of course, intimidated. Olympic champion, world champion, on the track, later on the road, time trialing. So it was absolutely great to catch up, and he is still a bundle of knowledge and a bundle of wisdom.
Yeah, I was super happy that we got him speaking so much because, when he was in the team bus, he always had his head buried in a book and said very, very little. So sit back and relax and listen to our great interview with Commander Chris Boardman. All right, everyone, pretty special episode for Yenzi and I today here on The Odd Tandem. We have Commander Chris Boardman. Chris, welcome to the show.
No one's saluting. Why is no one saluting? It'd take me ages to train the kids.
Actually, in fact, with my little bit of history knowledge, are you holding the same rank as Mr. James Bond?
Actually, I had this conversation with my wife. Apparently, Daniel Craig, who I went to school with, as I think you know. Did you know that? I don't know if you knew that. I was in the same class at school with Daniel Craig. I think he's got a higher rank, but I'm not bitter at all.
The way that it works in England with the abbreviations, with the titles, can you kind of tell us the steps of these titles? Because, Mark Cavendish is now Sir Mark Cavendish. You are now Commander Boardman. But can you explain to our listeners over here in the States what does that mean exactly, and what is the tiers of it?
I think it means Mark can tell me to do push-ups and I can tell you to do push-ups. I think that's how it works, roughly speaking. It's there's loads of them. There's loads of them, and they've all got. It's just this ancient stuff that's actually quite quirky and to to understand if you ever take the time. But it's just a nice recognition of what people do, and certainly Mark deserves his stuff, doesn't he? He's been, God, I can't believe how long he's been around winning bike races. When you count it up, how many, it's just ridiculous. So it's just nice as a way to recognise it. What do you have in the States?
I don't think we have anything like that.
You have money.
Outside of the military.
Probably the next big thing is probably Bobby gets a lifetime senator suite in a Trump Tower. That's probably his acknowledgement.
Whether you like it or not.
Oh man, we can't talk politics on the show, right, Yenzi?
Is that a rule? Have you got a
yeah,
rule about not
that's,
talking politics? I live in politics now. I don't know how it happened, but I'm involved in it. And actually, I'm technically, contractually not allowed to talk about politics because I work for the government.
But Chris, let's start right from the beginning. How and when and where did you start cycling? When did you discover that, hey, cycling might be a sport for myself? Let's start at the beginning here.
Oh my God, that's a long time ago. When I was 13, cycling was like a family thing, and that's what we did on a Thursday night. We'd all go somewhere so my dad could ride a race, and then eventually they let me have a go in the race, and then it sort of started from there, really. And then it became, well, it gets a bit deep, really, but, that's a way to have some self-esteem as a young kid, and then it becomes how you meet girls, and then it becomes your sport, and then it's your job, and then you're 32. So it's quite a rapid journey, and it was interesting, but I've enjoyed the bit afterwards.
You were always one of the most intellectual cyclists I ever came across, and I came to the team that you were a big part of, started as GAN, and then switched over to Credit Agricole when I joined you in 2000, and that just happened to be the year that you retired. But you had a big influence on the young riders, Stuart O'Grady, Magnus Bagstedt, Yenzi, the list goes on and on. So what are some of your memories of these young kids that became legends of the sport when they just kind of came to GAN and Credit Agricole in those early days? You must have just been sitting there scratching your head a little bit.
They're probably not as wholesome as my first, when you just said these young kids you were influenced. I can remember Yenzi sitting there with a pint in Paris airport going, I am a man, I can drink this. And then it got quite messy after it. I kind of remember the human bit of it. But we were all kids. We were all in our early 20s or mid-20s and just finding our way, and it was just absolutely fascinating. And we had money when you weren't supposed to have money at that age, and people bought cars and did stupid things. Yenzi was actually the sensible one. He was the one with had an estate car and had to take people to the airport because everyone else had bought sports cars. And I think you were the one who mowed the grass at your place as well. So it was a real mixed bag, and it was looking back, it was just kids with status and the money that they had absolutely no idea what to do with it. I think on the bike riding bit, I just like making things. I was fascinated with performance and how you get better, and I'd had some experiences where I'd bumped into some people outside of our world, aerodynamicists and engineers, and they just asked brilliant questions like, what do you ride in that position? What do you do in this position? And then I had an experience in a wind tunnel that allowed me to go and explore. And so that knowledge came into our world, and cycling was such a closed shop in those days. The previous person that had really changed things was Greg LeMond, where he'd come in with a wholly different experience, and he changed the way we did things. So every few years, I think new knowledge comes into the sport, and I brought some from Lotus and engineers that made a difference, and it was good fun. Actually, it was part good fun, and it was part really horrible as well, because I used to get a real kicking every time we used to go up a mountain, and I didn't enjoy that bit.
For our viewers for a better understanding, Chris designed back in the days when it was still officially allowed to use a front wheel of a smaller size. Chris had his own designed fork and handlebar combination. So his handlebars would be coming out on top of the fork and not on top of the steering or part of the frame, but out on the forks. Absolutely fantastic design. Nowadays, I think they declare all that illegal. But yeah, Chris was quite innovative, I have to admit. Right, Chris? You only wrote these type of a fork and frame combination, right?
Yeah, it was driven by some previous understanding of being in wind tunnels and knowing that what shape I could get me into, and I'm 80% of the frontal area, so get me smaller, it makes a big difference. And I'd had some experience in wind tunnels that showed me that difference. So when I came to the pro world and you had bikes that was, here's a small, medium and large, pick, thinking, well, you've taken away most of the advantage I've had. Luckily that we worked for somebody that would let me bring my own ideas, bring my own stuff with me. And that was really important, really. I'm not sure all teams would have done that. So I designed my own handlebar and fork combination that I got manufactured in the UK so I could get the position that I wanted on a bike. And then we were sponsored by, I think it was Eddie Merckx in those days, Eddie Merckx bikes, which were pretty agricultural in their design. And we had the flexibility to go, well, I've actually got this Lotus machine, can we use that? And we had a boss in Roger Leger that went, okay, I'll see if I can square that. I made it work. In fact, no, it wasn't. When I first started, it was actually Greg LeMond, but he was so obsessed with performance, even though he was sponsoring the team, he went, yeah, let's use those bikes, they look better than mine. So it was a time when you could do that because you hadn't invested, you didn't have sponsors that were so heavily invested in the sport. We had the flexibility to experiment a bit, so it was a nice time.
So when you won the Olympics in 1992, you did the 4-kilometer individual pursuit. Do you remember what your time was and what size your front chainring was or what gear that you were using?
No, I can only just about remember that you turned left and it was 16 laps. I get asked that kind of stuff a lot in the technical detail, and I'm afraid I can't. I mean, you want to try writing an autobiography when you have no memory and don't look backwards. And I feel a bit uncomfortable sometimes, but I've just got used to the fact that I just lose interest in what happened because I'm interested in what's fascinating and what's next. And it feels like a million years ago, the Olympic Games. I mean, it did a lot. It opened up a lot of opportunities. It allowed me to do things today in government because I get my foot in the door when other people don't. But it was a wonderful experience. And then I just want to turn the page and watch the next thing and the next thing. The Olympics then, I mean, I can remember it was so long ago. The digital clock at the side of the track was one where you painted the numbers on and little things flipped over to change it. You know, that was that long ago. It was in colour though.
I can fill in there because I spent so much time with Chris as a roommate and in the team. Between the pre-round and the final, he went to the movies to relax. He liked the 2 hours in the darkness and watched the movie. I can't name the movie anymore, but he went to the movies. And in the final, he was up against Golinelli. They both were going out like rockets on world record speed. And every lap, every kilometer, Chris looked over. He's at my speed. He's at my speed. He's going to blow. He's going to blow. He's going to blow. He's going to blow. And in the end, Golinelli did. Like, 1 lap or 2 laps to go, he actually lost, I think, half a lap to you. But until then, you were like face to face, head to head. And you went, okay, I can hold the speed. There's no way in hell he can hold the speed. You were just fully trusting that Golinelli on the other side is gonna blow up in the end. And actually, it did happen like that. I remember it like yesterday when you told me.
Yeah, that was 96 with Golinelli. And he'd already decided I'm going to go out really quick and see if I can scare him. And I think that's the beauty of the time trials, and both of you, particularly you, Bobby, are really familiar with that. Most of it is about you. It's not about the other people that are in the race. Most of it's about you and looking inwards and working out how fast am I going, how far is it to go, can I keep this up? And if the answer's yes, you're not going hard enough. If the answer's no, it's already too late. The answer you're looking for is maybe all the time. But all of that is internal. And so you just got to trust, particularly in those events when you can get wrapped up in trying to match somebody else on a track. For the first 2 or 3 minutes, you really need to just think about yourself, and then you can start to look at the other person. Because I learned it very early on with a psychologist who taught me it doesn't matter how much money's involved, it doesn't matter how many people are watching, whatever the size of the prize, you can only do the best that you can, and then cross the line and look at the board and see what it got you. And it sounds very simplistic, but it's a great way to treat life, really. It is just, okay, I'll just be the best that I can, and when I've crossed the line, I'll see what it gets me. And I use that to this day in jobs that I do now. That's all you can do.
Well, we are going a little bit back because, you know, I was a time trial guy. I was teammates with you, and I was trying to pick your brain. And this is my memory of the conversation because I asked you about pacing a time trial. What is your technique on pacing? Because, you know, especially later in my career and then coaching, you know, at some of these teams, we always thought of, you know, negative splits and, you know, going over your threshold on the climbs and then recovering on the descents. But one thing that you said to me, and I hope you remember it and I remember it correctly. You were like, I go 400 watts the whole time. And I'm like, wait, Chris, there's a climb in this one. He's like, yeah, I go 400 up the climb, and then I go 400 on the false flat, and then I go 400 on the descent. I'm basically stable power. Is that true? How did you pace your time trials? Because you were such an ace at it, especially in the prologues.
I think there's some paraphrasing in there because the whole watts thing was a language that came along when we were kids, when we were doing this, and we were suddenly able to measure effort. We could actually see a number for effort, and it was a great tool, but a lot of people became a slave to it and it worked against you. So for everything, for training, you understood your own performance and you could measure it, and you could look at a thing that told you what the number was for that, and that helped you go a little bit more and a little bit less. I think the important thing was to understand what that felt like. And then when it came to race day, it was about what it felt like. And the conversation that we had was about making this about your effort and not about the terrain. And there's some nuances. So, you know, if you know you've got a massive descent, then you can go slightly into the red, and because you're going to have to freewheel on the descent. So understanding the course was a big part of it. But ultimately, it was all about being on your limit all the time and not going over it because you feel you should be going quicker up this climb or whatever. Not responding to that emotional element, but sticking with understanding what that felt like, 400 watts, and sticking to that and making sure that you didn't overextend, because you'd pay a price later. And the wonderful thing and the horrible thing about a time trial is you don't get to recover. Your pressure's supposedly on the pedals all of the time. And so if you go into the red too early, and too early is before the last 2 minutes, then the cost of recovery is so high you can't do it. And it takes tremendous mental discipline and self-confidence to know that I can't go any harder than this, because if I do, then I'm going to kill it. And probably that was what I was rather crudely trying to express. It's the mesh, isn't it, between being a science and an art form?
Hey, Chris, one question I think I always wanted to ask already back in the days. What did you like better, winning the Olympics with the world record or catching the world champion, what was his name, the French rider? Luc Leblanc. Catching Luc Leblanc at the Tour de France prologue for a minute in 5.5 kilometers? Passing the bloody world champion on a finishing straight. What was the better feeling? What do you think?
I think I think the Tour de France is the biggest ego. I mean, I've actually been asked that before. What's world hour record, Tour de France prologue, or Olympic Games? And I've over 20 odd years I've dodged the question, because the three things were really. The first one was unemployed carpenter, wife, 2 kids, absolutely no money, and this is your 15 minutes. This is it, and it either works or it doesn't. And so that opened up all the other possibilities. And an Olympic gold medal, you can go into the outback, into the wilds or a jungle and say Olympics, and people go, oh yeah, I know what that is. And so Olympics are always special. It transcends each individual sport. But then in our sport, at the time, because there was no World Time Trial Championships, the Tour de France was the unofficial World Time Trial. The prologue was the unofficial World Time Trial Championships to the world, and that was the big deal. And I went, particularly that year, 1994. Everybody went for a 3-week race. I went for 7 minutes, and everything had been predicated on 7 minutes. I'd like training and the warm up, and then the pre-review of the course beforehand to look at the bends and where every pothole and manhole cover was, and that was the entry into the pro world, and of course it's the only stage where you get the yellow jersey as well, which we hadn't had since Tommy Simpson, I don't think. So that, I mean, and to catch Luc Leblanc after him saying the year before that half the peloton could beat the hour record now, that was quite amusing. But that they were the days when he just got his time trial bike and seen it for the first time on the morning of the time trial and started to adjust it with Allen keys and things. And it was so rudimentary, remarkable, really. And then I'd come along as somebody who'd thought about it, rehearsed it, fettled it, and that approach to a prologue had not been seen before. It was something you just did and got out of the way. But this is a really valuable thing in this sport, to be able to, for a team to be able to take a yellow jersey on day one is your insurance policy. And I'd seen that value, and that I suppose had an impact on everything that came after. And then the hour record, I think the one in 96, of the 3 things I'd done, that was physically the best I ever was. And we even got the lowest pressure record day, the lowest pressure on record in Manchester for the day of that. It was absolutely perfect. You couldn't have changed anything else, and it's probably the only performance where I look back and think there was nothing I would have changed. Everything you can find something you'd have done differently. So I find it hard to split those 3 things, to be honest. But yeah, sticking it to Luc Leblanc was quite nice.
Man, I was just kind of really getting into cycling and dreaming about the Tour de France, and I remember watching that, and you beat my hero Miguel Indurain by 15 seconds, and I remember Phil Liggett, commentating, and you just were like just flying. But I know we don't want to go too much into the weeds here because this was so long ago, but I have to ask because you mentioned the warm-up. Do you remember your warm-up protocol for that day?
Yeah, 15 minutes. 15 minutes, 2 short efforts, and then stop. And I think it was the same thing. It was very hard to not get on the turbo trainer or the rollers and do something, because everybody's really nervous and just wants to do something. And the hardest bit is to wait. And that warm-up finished 10 minutes before the start, and not further away. And I'd already done the signing on, I'd already done the numbers, I knew exactly how long it would take me to get to the start. Really just thought everything through. And it had been practiced. It had been practiced for several years, and I knew it worked, and there was no need to deviate from it. It's quite hard in those times of stress to stick to what you know works.
I remember 2 things, and I used them for my entire life. Chris was the first man who ever told me, with his British Liverpool accent, "Hey Jens, it's always better to be at the giving end of pain than to be at the receiving end of the pain." I always remember that. And
I thought it was going to be one on birth control, but you've actually got you've got 5 kids, I think, haven't you, as well now?
Six, Chris. Yeah, I'm chasing you hard, my friend. I got 6 as well. It's 12 kids in between us.
Not
Plus
maybe.
2
Oh
kids
my
from Bobby.
God!
So
If I
we
had
got
2
14
kids, I would
here.
shoot myself. I remember that one. And then every year when you
me
tell me you had
too.
another kid, I just laughed. Yeah. Okay, you didn't remember. That wasn't the
Me
piece of
too.
advice you remember.
I remember.
Then, oh.
The other thing I remember from Chris is the morning before a time trial or the week before the Tour de France. You cannot write yourself into shape anymore, but you can very well write yourself into the ground. And I always try to remember that.
I remember I learned that one the hard way. I think we all did. We tried to force form. I'll just do some more. And with a week to go, it's just done. Just done. The only thing you can do is damage. Just wait. And wait, we just touched on it really. Waiting is the hardest thing, isn't it? It's always the hardest thing. You want to do something to try and make the result you want, but you just got to wait. And it's hard to do nothing, particularly for highly motivated people.
You hit that nail on the head, because I remember it may have been the Midi Libre in 2000 or something like that. We were doing a time trial, and like 15, 20 minutes before I go in to, put on my skin suit, and you're just there like reading a book, like not doing anything, just reading a book. And I'm like, man, Chris, like, don't you have a start time in like 20 minutes? And you're like, yep, I do. So like you mastered that relaxation before a prologue or a time trial that I don't think I ever did.
I mastered the bluffing. If you'd looked at the book, you'd have seen I'd read the same page 3 times. And if you looked at the heart rate monitor, it was about 130. So I've mastered the cool look. I think that was the thing. Inside, it was just going, shit.
But I remember, you said that, you concentrated on these short efforts and whatnot. But I remember 1996 in Paris-Nice, you and Lance Armstrong, and I think it was Jalabert, were just like tag teaming each other. And I think Jalabert wound up winning, but you were like second or third. Paris-Nice is a very hard stage race. Did you change anything specifically in your training that year to allow you to be able to stomp on everybody but those other 2 guys?
I had a couple of years until when it just fell right. And form was good. So was that 96? Was that 96?
96, 95 or 96.
But 96, I was in good shape. I was in good shape that year, and I was discovering what I was capable of. But I mean, we got caught up in the whole the drugs thing around us, and it was really hard to predict what comes next and whether you. But that was just a moment when, oh my God, I seem to be able to win stuff. Great, go for it. And it was wonderful. I think it was the Midi Libre, actually. I think it was, and I remember that. It was a great experience.
So, Chris, you retired relatively early at 32 or 33, right?
Yeah, 32.
So, where did life take you from there after this beautiful, successful career? Married, not a carpenter anymore, 6 kids. Where did your life go after that?
Not where you'd expect, I think. I was made up to stop. It was great, and I was really happy to stop. And it's probably not many people get to stop on their own terms. And I just had enough in 2000. So the hour record, the athlete's hour record, was the last thing I ever did. And it was really exciting. I thought I'll retire, and that lasted about 3 weeks until I got bored of that. And I wrote for a scuba diving magazine because I was really interested in that. And I went round the world reviewing training courses and cave diving and all sorts of stuff. And that was good fun. Didn't make any money, but it was great. And I got an email from a really badly written email from a guy called Alan Ingerfield, who was a triathlete. And I was going to push delete. And Sally, my wife, said, no, go and meet him. And this guy wanted to start a bike company. Sally said, no, go and meet him. It's only over in Liverpool, so not far from me. So I thought, okay, and I go and meet him. And then that ended up being Boardman Bikes Limited, which to this day sells about 50,000 bikes a year. So So that was good. So that occupied quite a few years, and that was just at the time when cycling was getting on the up and really becoming visible. 2007, by the time we got the company going, and then we had the Tour de France in the UK, and it was a great time. And I'd also got involved in advocating for cycling for just getting to school and going to work, and I realised, my God, this machine that I've been using as a child and go racing, it's really good. And you can do loads with it, and it's low carbon and all the other things. Every problem that we were facing as a society, this machine actually helped us fix it. This is great. So I got involved in advocating for it, and then I got closer and closer to the politics of it. And then there's a regional politician called Andy Burnham in the whole Greater Manchester area, and he said, "Come and work for me and implement that for this whole city region." And I did that for 4 or 5 years. And we produced this plan for a 1,500 mile network for the region, so people could drive less if they wanted to and get to schools. And it was a fantastic job. So it's £1.5 billion and 10-year plan. And then as the government's changed, I'm going through quite a lot of time here really quickly. As the government's changed, they went, "Will you come and do that for England?" So I said, "Okay, I'll do that for England." And that's pretty much what I'm doing now. So we're overseeing £3.5 billion worth of investment in infrastructure to try and get close to what you've got in Germany. That's pretty much where I am now. And it's been fascinating. The last few years with the changes in government we've had have been interesting. But yeah, I've got really close to politics, but far enough away. Yeah. That's the only word I'm allowed to use at the moment.
So tell me a little bit more about, infrastructure, right? Because in the U.S., we have very, very little of that. Like, most of the roads down here in South Carolina that I ride on, we don't even have a shoulder. Yeah. So are you talking like, from town to town, or like, specific to each city? What actually is the definition of infrastructure for cyclists that you're talking about?
Well, you've got some good stuff, actually. You've got Portland is sensational. So you've got it in pockets. So the same in the UK, where you've got Cambridge and you've got Oxford, and you've got some places where they've got 30% of journeys are made by bike, but that's unusual. It's not normal. And we think really small. So we're really parochial. We don't look over there and go, "That's great, we should do that thing." We just think about what we do, and we drive cars here. And it's really hard to unpick. But the secret is not to talk about cycling and walking. The secret is to talk about, do you want your kids to be able to get to school independently? Yes, I do want that thing. Okay. What would you need? Well, they'd have to be safe. Okay, well, describe to me what that looks like. And then you have to take all the people of a region through a journey of going, okay, should we do that then? Yeah, let's do that. And it's, I've just truncated probably what is a 3-year journey to get people to see things differently. But the outcome, everybody agrees. You have kids with independence and parents who don't have to own 3 cars in a household. They could just have 2 or maybe 1 and save money and spend it on something else. So the secret to getting more cycling is to not talk about cycling. It's to talk about all the things that you care about, saving money, and then we get to do all the other good stuff like decarbonisation and all the things that are going to kill the species as well. So it's been fascinating. It's essentially it's a job in psychology. It's actually not to do with tarmac and infrastructure. It's to do with human psychology and how do you get people to want to change. Which is quite challenging. And I think that's what keeps me interested in it. It's about people getting out of their own way. But ultimately, Bobby, what people need is to feel safe. If they don't feel safe, we won't change. And just as importantly, if it's not easy, I won't change, because that's how we're built. So if it's not as easy as what I'm doing now, I'm not doing it. So we have to make it easy and we have to make it safe, or nothing changes.
So maybe give us an example of where you go, oh my God, that was so easy. It worked within a day. Or the other example where you like pulling your hair for like 3 years and things wouldn't work. Do you got an example for that as well?
Paris. I think Paris is it. So Anne Hidalgo said, I'm essentially going to pedestrianise Paris. And she got death threats and it was horrific. And she nearly lost her job. And between one election and the next, so 3-4 years, she was then getting bouquets of flowers from the same people. So the taxi drivers were going, you're going to kill our trade. You're stopping us driving where we want to go and using all of these shortcuts. And they got incensed for fear of losing their livelihood. And then when they went, oh, actually, when people aren't driving cars everywhere, they need taxis every now and again. This is really good for us. But she had to do the first bit. And now Paris is now one of the exemplars for the world, not just because of what they've done, but how quickly they did it. In the space of 3 or 4 years, they've actually made it a really nice place to be. When we were riding bikes, you probably remember I can't remember the name of them, the 2 roads that run down either side of the Seine River. And they were just expressways for traffic. And she went, actually, that's a really nice place for people. Why don't we let people go there and stop the traffic? And that was like, oh my God, you can't do that. And now you'd have a much bigger fight if you tried to put it back. And they're places where people ride bikes and sit in cafes, and it's great. And that same story is played out in Bolton or, I don't know, in Oxfordshire or in other places in the country, because it's just about human beings being scared of change. But I think Paris is probably one of the best examples. And hopefully we're going to get a chance to talk about that this summer. In fact, I will on the BBC. Just go look at what they did. We could have that as well.
Wow, interesting. Chris, to switch gears again, we got the Tour de France coming up with the Olympics right after that. Do you pay much attention to the current world of cycling now that you're, in politics? I know you said before we started recording that you're riding your bike a lot, but I'm just wondering, do you pay attention to it? What do you think of the Tour de France this year?
I pay attention to it intensely when I'm about to have to go and work on it. So the Tour de France I had to give up year before last after 20 years, which is a real wrench because I just couldn't fit everything in. Because I'm also the chairman of Sport England, which governs all grassroots sport in England. I forgot that one. So I've got a couple of jobs. So I had to give something up. So the Tour de France had to go. But I kept hold of the BBC work for the Olympics and World Championships, which I just really like it. It's great. So I often have to cram really hard just coming into an event to get back up to speed. I think what really helps, though, is the how you ride a race doesn't change. So the technology changes and the names change, but how people are interacting, that is a constant about human beings. So I can fall back on that a little bit. But I've been watching this year. I mean, the current crop, and I do tune into the racing, and I'll be watching all of the Tour. I'm actually going to ride to Paris this year, which I think I said this year to do with the job. So I'm going to ride from Manchester to Paris for 16 days and watch the highlights programme for the Tour in the evenings. But it's we've got a good crop now. I mean, Pogacar is obviously, the man. And isn't it great that he seems to be a really nice bloke as well? I think that's, he's really nice. And when he does interviews, you're thinking, oh, this guy's actually seems to be enjoying himself rather than it being like stressed and it's like a war. He's like, he's having a bit. It probably pisses everybody else off, I think. But there's some people there that can challenge him, but there's been so much injury this year as well. You've probably got about half a dozen people and you're not quite sure what form they're going to be in.
But to fall back on that, from our experience, the period between the Giro Italia and the Tour, it's very difficult to negotiate, right? It's too long to keep pushing. It's too short to break down and rebuild, right? So you got to be smart with your training and efforts, I believe, in between that, right?
Yeah, but don't you also like the fact that they've broken the mould in the last few years? So, the young riders jersey, it's almost redundant now, isn't it? Where you've got a crop of riders who went, yeah, I'm not interested in that one, I'll just go for the next one. And so they've left it behind. And I love that. And you go, yeah, we just do these one major tour in a year. No, I quite fancy riding the classics, actually. I'm going to do that as well. So I like the fact that people are challenging the norm. The Giro Tour de France one, that being said, is difficult because a month and then that block in the middle, you haven't got time to detrain and come back. You can't keep training. You can't peak for 3 months. So what do you do? But it's new people thinking about it in a different way. I guess we'll find out in next week, or rather in about 2 weeks, whether Pogacar's like, yeah, I'm actually feeling even better, and everyone's going, oh God, no. We couldn't deal with it in the first place, and it's even better. But I think Vinegal, coming back from injury, there's a real unknown there. He's beaten for 2 years. I think he's only had about 14 days of racing. So that's a real unknown. Good team around him. And Roglic as well. I mean, he's got to be moving towards his last chance. He's in really good shape. So there's lots of potential for an upset. And that's why we like watching it, isn't it? You've got this guy as the favourite, but he's not going to have it all his own way.
Yeah, I mean, it's like waiting for Christmas morning. Here we are a couple days from the start, and Jens is going to be hanging his knees off the back of a motorcycle for the first week.
Oh, you're doing that job again.
It's
Yep, the first 9 days until the first rest day. Yep.
Which, I mean, honestly, it adds such a cool element to the sport. And, we were all on French teams, and back then it always seemed like we do this because that's what we've done in the past. And I was frustrated. And, I think you were as well, that there wasn't that innovation. But you brought in, you training with power. You brought in aerodynamics. You brought in a different position with the Superman position. You did an amazing thing when the sport really wasn't quite ready for it. So I'm curious to hear, with all the technical innovations in the sport right now, which are the ones that you look at and say, wow, I wish I would have had that?
A wind tunnel. I forgot that, actually. I built a wind tunnel in the middle there as well. I forgot to add that in. But I think a wind tunnel.
You built a wind tunnel?
Yeah, I built a wind tunnel. Yeah, it was pretty cool, if I say so myself. Because you have a way to experiment. And the horrible thing about wind tunnels is they don't tell you why. They just go better, worse. And then you go, whoa, what happened there? You've got to work it out for yourself. And you go back for another experiment, another one. But I learned, so I had my first experience, as we mentioned, back in the winter of 91. And it was a wind tunnel that they used to test trucks and things. So it was like weighing peas on bathroom scales. It was really crude. But everything we were doing then was so crude, it was enough to go, my God, look at the difference if you do this. And I'd remembered that experience. So when I worked with the British team, the British Olympic team, I set up the R&D programme. It's something else I forgot, actually, on the journey. The R&D programme, and we were spending up to a week a month in wind tunnels, just finding out new stuff. And we brought new people in with different knowledge who knew absolutely nothing about cycling. And that's why they were amazing, because they went, would you use, how wide are your handlebars? 42 centimetres. Why? Because that's the width of your shoulders. Because you don't realise how constrained you are by history. And he went, well, would you use 38 centimetre handlebars? And you go, yeah, I think we'd do that. And you go, how about 22 centimetre? No, we couldn't do that. Why not? I don't know. And so a wind tunnel, we brought together these people who just thought completely different. And they brought in, we can talk about it now, they went, okay, you've got cylindrical arms. You can't change the cylinder. Well, just put some trip lines down the side of it. What do you mean? Yeah, it's pretty standard. We've been doing that since biplanes. Okay, because we looked outside the box, somebody else, and then we dropped the drag of Olympic athletes by an average of 11%, I think. And suddenly people were going from fourth to first. It was like amazing. And that hasn't stopped. It's taken over a decade for everybody to catch up. But the vehicle that allows you to do it is a wind tunnel, a way to understand better, worse. And I think the big change that I can see across the peloton now is people have finally cottoned onto aerodynamics is like nearly everything. Because if you do your job, Bobby, and people who coach, and if you get a really good athlete and then you coach them really well, you'll improve their performance by 1%. Whereas you put them in a wind tunnel and efficiency and go, actually, I'm at 3%, 4%, 5%, and that unlocked so much wholly different way of thinking. And now I'm watching the kids with their narrow handlebars and then their brake levers turned in a little bit and thinking, but look how long it took to get there. And you mentioned me being an innovator. Well, I wasn't good enough to drive it all the way through. If I'd been a Tour de France, if I'd been a Greg LeMond, then all of that stuff would have proliferated really quickly because that's what we do. We follow the leader. So it's taken quite a while. It's been great to be involved in it, though. It's quite interesting. You'd have absolutely loved it, getting in the wind tunnel and when no one had ever done it before and just finding stuff all the time. It was great. It was quite a long answer, that. Sorry, Bobby.
It was fascinating, like everything you said so far. Hey, Chris, if I understood it right, you also head of Sport England, which is a big title, and you talked about the grassroots sports. How do we get, in all countries of the world, basically, how do we get more kids into sport or into not only soccer or football, whatever we call it in Grande Britannia or in the US or in Germany? How do we get more kids motivated to do sports?
Well, the reason I took that particular job, so it takes lottery funding and distributes it. So this business gives out about 320 million a year, but only about 100 million is on sport, and 200 million is really about activity and health. And what they worked out before I became chair, what they worked out was, if you do this really nice sports centre and it's really great, and all the people over there don't have a bus or they don't access it, or people like me don't go there, then it doesn't matter how shiny it is, no one's using it. So that they changed the strategy to go to the local community and go, what are you already doing? Would you like to do more of it? What do you like? What do you need? And so we went down, we met people where they were at, if you like, and asked them what they needed. And we've got things like with muslin cycling groups in Birmingham, or back of a gym in somewhere else, back of a garage, we set up a gym for wrestling for a particular group, and that becomes their hub, and it gets more and more. I think one of the things that cycling's got just recently that's really good is BMX. And I watched the imagery from the last Olympics, and I watched, so we had one of the medalists, Kai White, and he's one of the London clubs. And then behind him was kids who'd come to play, and then their parents had come along as well, because that's where we have a cup of tea and a chat. And you could see that people were going to this place to play, to do a few tricks, to maybe have a go at a competition, to actually get serious about it, for it to be my sport. And the whole spectrum was there in one club. And that's what Sport England does. We actually look for things like that are much more than the sport. The sport's just the glue that holds everything else together. And it's just another fascinating bit of what we can do. And cycling can play a big part in that, really. So Sport England funds a lot of cycling-related stuff because it reaches a lot of people. But I think ultimately you've got to make it fun. Or why would I?
That's one of the things that when I see young riders coming up and they're all so serious because they all have all this data at their fingertips. They know they're so much more educated and have so much more knowledge than we had coming in. But that's the one thing the one word that I use a lot is you can do all that stuff as long as you have fun. And you mentioned it early, Tadej Pogacar. He looks like he's having fun. So like, don't be that robot. Be that kid that has fun and really enjoys it. But I have to say, Chris, I had a couple years working for Sky back in the day, and if I was up in the belly of the beast up there in Manchester, and you walk through, it was like, oh my gosh, I just saw a unicorn. And then we've just had the last 45 minutes with you face to face. So I just want to thank you so much for coming on. It was great to catch up, and wish you all the best with everything that you're doing, and just have a nice, safe ride down to Paris. You said it was going to take you 16 days to do that?
I know, we'll do it in 8. We're starting on the 16th, but I'm going to do it in 8 days. So I'll do some more training around the Cairngorms first.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the Odd Tandem today. And thank you for everything that you've done for the sport and you're continuing to do in your country for cycling safety.
Cheers, fellas.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to the podcast. There'll be loads more content popping up here, including more great interviews with top guests like Chris Boardman.
Please keep dropping your questions for us in the comments. And check our description below to find us on social media and Patreon to support our channel.